Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at the Association of Pacific Rim Universities, APRU Multi-Hazards second webinar series, a new approach for disaster risk management. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this webinar series. This webinar series is organized by APRU Multi-Hazards Program, the International Research Institute of Disaster Science, Tohoku University in Japan, and University of Indonesia, and the CBRN NATEC Asian Disaster Risk Initiative. I'm Takako Izumi, Associate Professor of Tohoku University and Program Director of the APRU Multi-Hazards Program. And also I'm a moderator for today's session. I'd like to introduce the APRU Association of Pacific Rim Universities very briefly to those who are not familiar with it yet. APRU is a network that consists of 56 universities in the Pacific Rim from 18 economies. Its international secretariat is based in Hong Kong, and under APRU, there are several programs to tackle global issues, not only multi-hazards, but also global health and sustainable city and landscape, and so on. You're very much encouraged to check the APRU website for further information on its various APRU programs and the events. And the Multi-Hazards Program under APRU was established in 2013, and its secretariat is hosted by Tohoku University in Japan. The program has been working to strengthen the collaborative researches on disaster science among the APRU member universities from 18 economies in the Pacific Rim, and contribute to international and regional discussions for a DRR policy making through various channels and platforms. Its major activities include the summer school, annual symposium, and campus safety programs. And I'm sure some of you have already participated in these events and programs. Thank you so much for your participation. And for further details of the activities, please also check its or APRU website. So this webinar series comprises 3 separate sessions. Today's session is the first one out of 3 sessions, and its theme is understanding and addressing different types of hazard risks. We are going to have 3 speakers: Professor Fatoma Rastali from University of Indonesia, Mr. Martin Claude Meyer from the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent, IFRC, and Mr. Jeff Walker from the JKG Consulting to learn about different types of hazard risks such as chemical, radiological, and CBRN. After these presentations, the main points are summarized by Mr. Andrew Raj from the CBRN NATEC Asian Disaster Risk Initiative to wrap up this session. So while you are listening to the presentations, I would like to encourage you to send us questions using the Q&A function. And after each presentation, I will take some questions from the audience and ask the speaker to answer these questions. So that is all about the information about who we are, what is APRU. So before inviting the speakers, I also would like to share the background and objectives of this webinar series very briefly. So I will share a couple of slides on the screen. Okay, now I'd like to talk about the background and objective of this webinar series, including why we need to expand our scope from natural hazards to other types of hazards, such as biological, technological, radiological, and so on. I believe most of you already know the Sender Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which was adopted in 2015 at the UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, and it became a blueprint of a DR strategy for the next 15 years. And I suppose that most of us had been focusing on natural hazards, such as earthquake, flood, and typhoon, and so on, for many years, simply because the Asian region had to face so many disasters. However, the experiences of COVID-19 pandemic reminded us that disaster risks are not only natural, but also include different types of hazards, such as biological, chemical, industrial, and so on. And we have learned that these different types of hazards, including biological, can affect lives, livelihoods, and health tremendously. And standard framework clearly also states that it will apply to the risks caused by environmental, technological, and biological hazards. In addition, the framework emphasizes the importance of developing methodologies to assess risks, vulnerabilities, and exposures to all hazards. And it is very timely that the technical report called Hazard Definition and Classification Review was issued by UNDRR and International Science Council for us to consider which hazard risks we need to target in the risk management strategy in our respective country. And you can download this report online. And the report is really significant because of the hazard list developed, which complies 302 hazards. And it is classified by 8 categories, including chemical, biological, technical, and societal hazards. And this report aimed to address the scope of hazards that standard framework targets beyond the traditional focus of natural hazards. However, it is also important for us to understand that it does not mean we need to look into all of 302 hazards, but rather this report can provide a baseline knowledge on hazards that can be used to engage various stakeholders. And that means that to tackle a wider scope of hazards, we need to work with various stakeholders and experts with different knowledge and expertise. Also, the report reiterates the point that most of the current networks do not have expertise to cover the different types of hazards. And it can be a challenge for our future risk management effort. So it is important to consider how we could expand our collaboration with groups that have knowledge and experience that we do not have. And of course, we do not have to and cannot be an expert on all types of hazards, but rather it is crucial to identify partners and organizations we could work with. Also, it is extremely important to identify the areas we could look into as a common strategy in the various hazards to increase efficiencies in planning for and responding to emergencies. For instance, an area of risk communication could be one of them, but it requires further discussion and learning from each other. And I hope we could continue discussing it at the second and also the third sessions under this webinar series. And I do hope this webinar series will provide an opportunity to learn about different types of hazards and experts. Also, which organizations hold expertise and focus on which hazards as well. And I also would like to inform the platform called CBRN NETIC Agent Disaster Risk Initiative was created after the APRU Multi-Hazards Campus Safety Workshop this year. And we realized the need for increasing our preparedness capacity on campus based on the COVID-19 pandemic. But it has been just developed, and so there are so many things we need to consider on what we could do through this platform. But we hope this can create an opportunity to discuss issues among different stakeholders. And lastly, I'd like to share the schedule of this webinar series in October. The overall theme of this webinar series is a new approach for disaster risk management after COVID-19. And under this overarching theme, the first one, which is today's session, is about understanding and addressing different types of hazard risks. And second session will be organized on 14th of October, which is 2 weeks after today. And it will be operated by University of Indonesia. The theme of the second session is strengthening disaster management strategies through multi-stakeholder partnerships. And we have invited the speakers from UNDRR, UN Inter-Regional Crime and Justice Research Institute, and so on. And we will update information on this second session on the APRU website. And the registration link will be also opened soon. And the third session will be organized on 28th of October, again 2 weeks after the second session. And it will be operated by CBRN NITEC Asian Disaster Risk Initiative. The theme of the third session is developing innovative tools and approaches for disaster preparedness and response. So that is all about the background on this webinar series. And now I hope you will enjoy the presentations and discussions. Thank you very much. Okay, so now I'd like to invite our first speakers today, from Professor Fatoma Rastari from University of Indonesia. She's a professor and director of Disaster Risk Reduction Center at the University of Indonesia. And she's also a lecturer at Occupational Health and Safety Department, Faculty of Public Health, University of Indonesia. And her research areas include disaster health impact, hospital readiness and resilience, emergency disaster management, and biorisk management. She also conducted researches on occupational health and security within oil and gas, mining, manufacturer industries. And she holds PhD in safety science from UNSW Sydney, Australia, and master and bachelor degree in chemistry. So thank you, Professor Fatoma, for joining us today. So over to you.
Hello, Takako. Sorry, I cannot start the video. All right. Okay. Sorry, I think in my internet connection a bit problem a few minutes ago. Okay. Okay. I would like to share about the understanding and addressing different types of hazard. And thank you very much for having me in this APRU multi-hazard webinar series, a new approach for disaster risk management after COVID-19. I think Takako already introduced me. The outline of my presentation is about industrial chemical accidents and disasters that we experience nowadays, and the lessons learned from the typical of disasters. And particularly, I would like to address chemical safety and security and its related risks, and as well as propose mitigation strategies and the implementation of industrial chemical safety and security, as well as industrial chemical management. And the last one will be the key points from today's presentation. We knew that we experience industrial chemical disaster, including Piper Alpha, Bhopal, Deepwater Horizon, Gulf of Mexico. And the last one happened is the Siren gas leak in India 2020. Another industrial chemical accidents also involve the chemical storage at one of the port of Tianjin, China, which stored of ammonium nitrate, approximately 256 tons of TNT equivalent that explodes in 2015. And the last experience are during the month of August 2020, we also watched the Beirut explosion in Lebanon, at which a large amount of ammonium nitrate stored at the port of the city of Beirut, and causing at least 200 deaths and 3 people missing, with the cost of in property damage about 10 to 15 billion US dollar, and estimated about 300,000 people homeless. And this is related to chemical stored in a warehouse without a proper safety measures for the previous 6 years. In Indonesia, we also experience industrial chemical accidents related to chemical security and as well as chemical safety. These are several examples of fire due to chemical theft in oil and gas industry happened in 2009, and the impact is more than USD 7 million, and it is related to chemical security. The second one is the explosion in fireworks factory, around 49 deaths. This is due to poor understanding of chemical hazard. And the third one is the illegal oil pipeline tapping, 2014, 4 deaths, and it is related to chemical security. The last one is illegal oil drilling, 2017, with 2 deaths and 20 severe burns, and it is related to chemical security. Based on the several experiences, there are some lessons learned related to, for example, inadequate hazard identification or risk assessment, lack of understanding in addressing chemical hazards and threats, low awareness on chemical safety and security, inadequate work standards or procedure, inadequate supervision, improper decision-making or lack of judgment, as well as inadequate training or competency and violation on unintentional by individual or group. This is some of the lessons learned that we experienced. This one, I would like to share about the differences between chemical safety and chemical security. By using Swiss model, we focus on chemical safety for hazard assessment, while the chemical security, we focus on threat assessment. This is the terms that we use in both of chemical safety and security. The second one is in chemical safety, we conduct the consequence assessment, while in chemical security, we also conduct the consequence assessment related to chemical security. While in chemical safety, we control measure assessment. In chemical security, we evaluate protective barrier assessment. Safety incidents are mainly accidental. We call it accident. While security incidents is intentional, and we call it as a security incident. So this is the basic differences between chemical safety and chemical security. Industrial chemical safety and security both like two sides of a coin. While industrial chemical safety risk is a measure of human injury, environmental damage, or economic loss in terms of both incident likelihood and magnitude of the loss or injury. While the chemical security risk is an expression of the likelihood that a defined threat will exploit a specific vulnerability of a particular attractive target or combination of targets to cause a given set of consequences. Industrial chemical safety focus on protection of workers from chemical hazards, while industrial chemical security focus on the protection of chemicals from misuse. Chemical accidents prevention also the focus of industrial chemical safety. While the industrial chemical security, we are focusing on chemical security incidents prevention. And we know that chemical security related to unintentional incidents, while chemical security is intentional incidents. I would like to propose a mitigation strategies that we know of that for implementation of industrial chemical safety to ensure process safety management, we develop process safety management and implementing. As well as another major hazard control, we could also implement to mitigate the risk of chemicals related to chemical safety. While the relation to industrial chemical security, we could conduct security vulnerability assessment. And then we identify critical target, assess the threat and consequences, and then evaluation of the safeguard that we have in our industry. Another mitigation strategies are to implement industrial chemical management, a proper chemical order and purchasing, receiving, storage, transportation, handling, waste, as well as disposal. So this PDCA cycle help us to better manage the chemicals throughout the management system. For industrial chemical safety, the mitigation strategies that I presented the previous slides, including the process safety management, which consists of 20 elements from CCPS or Center for Chemical Process Safety, including the process safety culture. So we need to build the process safety culture within our organization to build the awareness as well as to build a culture on the process safety. Another elements include the standards, codes, regulation, and laws compliancy, and then process safety competency, workforce involvement. This is very important and one of the key success in implementing process safety management. Stakeholder outreach also very important because when the industrial disaster happen, so the stakeholder awareness also need to be understood. Process knowledge management, another important element, and then hazard identification and risk analysis, operating procedure, and then another elements. The major hazard control, including the identification of major hazard installation, the industry needs to identify whether their industry include in a major hazard installation. The role of management has been known that this is a very important and key success for major hazard control. The role of authorities and also the role of workers and workers' organization. Emergency planning, and then implementation of major hazard controls. Prerequisites for a major control system. So basically, both of the mitigation strategies could improve the industrial chemical safety. One from CCPS and another one from ILO. Related to industrial chemical security, we could do security vulnerability assessment to identify the target and critical assets, assess the threat, assess the consequences, and then industrial chemical security risk reduction, followed by evaluation of safeguards. First, we need to identify the target and critical asset that we have in our facility, including, it could be a people, equipment, systems, or the chemicals itself, products, as well as in very important information. And then you could also identify the other possible target and critical asset in your facility that could be motivate for the adversary to target. Assess the threats, including like a possibility of the pirates, probably during the transportation of the chemicals, and possibility of theft, public demonstration, adversary, and also another possible threats. These are some examples of the threats that could happen focusing on chemicals as a target. And then we assess the consequences. What are the consequences if the threat is occurred? It could be a fire, explosion, environmental pollution, injury, acute toxicity, or assets and damages, and also loss. Chemical security risk reduction could be include the deter, detect, and delay principles. Once the adversary target our facilities, it could be detect properly and very early detection. We can also use the physical or cyber protection, procedures, and administrative controls, as well as inherently safer systems. Types of countermeasures in relation for chemical security, including physical security and barriers, detection equipment, access control, loss prevention, material control, and inventory management. Control room security, crisis management, and emergency response. policies and procedure, as well as information, cybersecurity, and intelligence. Physical security and barriers could include the detection equipment, assessment or response, communication, access control, material control, accountability, and movement control. Barriers, perimeter protection, fencing, walls, and landscape. These are some examples of detection equipment and access control that you could implement in your facilities. The most important thing also is the evaluation of safeguards. This is the hierarchy of the effectiveness for the evaluation of safeguards. The top one we call perimeter intrusion detection and assessment system has been known as the most effective for technology and or cost from the view of technology and cost effectiveness. And then professional response force, on-site guards, sensors, camera, fences, access control, and as well as staff security awareness. And the most important is the threat understanding. So there are several key points that I've been presented that we need to better understanding the chemical hazard and the threats, which are very important to understand. The lack of understanding of the chemical hazard and threats could lead to industrial disasters. And the urgent need to address the chemical safety and security to prevent the chemical disasters. Several mitigation strategies could be implemented to address the chemical risks, including from the perspective of chemical safety and chemical security. And we need to the implementation of holistic approach to chemical safety, chemical security, as well as chemical management. Thank you very much, Professor Izumi. I think that's all my presentation today. Hopefully, this is a very interesting topic. Thank you very much. Professor Izumi.
Thank you very much, Professor Fatoma, for your very informative presentation. So we have a couple of questions for you. And first question is that accidents in the chemical industry can be triggered internally, for example, technological hazard, and externally, such as natural hazard. So what if it was triggered by an earthquake and tsunami and caused an industrial disaster? How to get the varied information?
Thank you very much, Professor Izumi. I think this is a new challenges for us, the combination between the natural and technological disaster. So when we do the risk assessment, either for the natural hazard, we need to also include the following up accidents related to due to natural disaster. So this is sometimes unidentified during the risk assessment. But since Indonesia also including, we have various natural disaster, so we need to include during the risk assessment, early before, during the design process.
Okay, thank you. So in relation to the answers you gave us right now, you know, we call it NATIC, the both industrial hazards and triggered by natural hazards. So what kind of initiative has been taken in Indonesia or your, I mean, your university or your team to tackle this NATIC, especially in particular?
Yeah, our role is to conduct the research, of course, and then include the NATIC disaster risk mitigation as our curriculum, in part of our course curriculum, to better understand all the hazards, including the NATIC risk. And then do the research and then include in the curriculum. And then we also participate in the RDEX 2018 include the scenario NATEC. This is one part of our role in that exercise. Also to socialize, disseminate to the community as well as to industry the importance to include NATEC risk.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. The NATEC issue is also very important for entire Asia, I think, because we have a lot of disasters and also a lot of countries currently in the development process. So I hope we can continue discussing that very important issue as well. Okay, thank you. So that our next question is, okay, as we know that occupational health and safety and environment are related, and some accidents happen, such as in Beirut, cause many casualties. Is it the accidents in Beirut belongs to industrial chemical security? Is it an environmental aspects also belong to industrial chemical security, you think?
Okay, so yeah, the chemical management include the mitigation strategies in the one that I propose. The explosion of Beirut, we don't know yet the result of the investigation. So it could be related to both chemical safety and then chemical security. Could be both. So as well as also include the chemical management, because this is occur in a chemical storage. So we need to be more precautions when we have a large amount that chemicals that could become industrial disasters. So that's why we need to better implement the process safety management in terms of chemical safety, and then also proper management of the chemical security. So I think it could be both chemical safety and security.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think the expertise you have is quite important, because that kind of risks exist in other parts of the world, I'm sure. Okay, so the next question is, will you consider to add strengthening organizational culture into your chemical safety and security management system?
Pardon me?
Okay,
could you please read it again?
Yeah, will you consider to add strengthening organizational culture into your chemical safety and security management system?
Yes, yes, of course. In one element of the process safety management is the process safety culture. So we could include that from the starting point by included the culture. Process safety culture, and then also the organizational culture is one part of to build the culture within the organization, to build the culture of safety. So in our research, it is indicated that by strengthening the organization culture, we could also strengthen the implementation of chemical safety and security.
Okay. Thank you so much. And we have quite a lot of questions, so I'm really not sure whether we can answer to all this, but I will ask the next question. How do business continuity management and the plan and DRR overlap?
DRR basically for managing the disaster risk, while the business continuity management focusing on how to continue and ensure the business of your organization keep going or keep continue. So the focus is probably would be overlap. Disaster response focus on the response of the disasters, while the business continuity focus on the ensuring the continuing of the business, whether any threat or disaster or any other disruption. So that's the focus both of the business continuity and also disaster risk response. Right.
Do you think a lot of the companies and the factories who might have such risks and hazard risks in the future, most of them have already a business continuity plan, you think?
Yep. Industries
especially in
which
Indonesia?
yeah, in Indonesia, some of industries already have a business continuity plan, and then implementing the business continuity plan. And we know that during COVID-19, so we need some industry already start the mode of business continuity plan. So they only critical workers that work at the moment. So they already activate the business continuity plan. And
So,
also there are another threats or disruptions.
So, for example, like expert like you or University of Indonesia are helping these companies and factories who needs BCP to develop that kind of a very important planning.
Right. Yeah, we have a very important role within the regulation. So I'm from Disaster Risk Reduction Center. We have a multidiscipline approach for helping the industries in developing business continuity plan, and then doing the trial, and then revise or revising when the disruption or potential threat are occurred. So yes, we do helping the industries for development of BCP, and then help them to implement the BCP, or sometimes help them to have testing and trial.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Good. Thank you. And also to tackle these issues, I think sort of the collaboration between the national level, like government and communities, are also very important. And what kind of collaboration in national level, government level, and community have been done in Indonesia right now? And what can we do? I mean, Indonesia, what can you do to improve the situation right now?
Yeah. So the government already developed regulation related to business continuity plan. In my perspective, this is already done by the oil and gas industries. So at the level of national, they already have the requirement. We call it PTK Health and Safety Management, PTK 05 2018, at which we also part of the development of the plan, at which include the emergency response plan. So the organization needs to develop emergency response plan, crisis management plan, as well as business continuity plan, and then submit it to the oil and gas national level, so they know exactly what are the hazards, risks within the oil and gas sectors. And now we are also helping the environmental Ministry of Environmental to also better prepare for the chemical emergency and disasters, helping the industries to identify the risks and potential risks that they are facing by using the chemicals from the chemicals. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So, you know that when we talk about the chemical factories and issues, the terminology is quite complicated and sounds very technical. So, to convey the risks about the chemical hazards, how do you communicate that kind of risk to the communities?
Okay, some industry include the participation of the community for their emergency drill. Some already done like that. And when we conduct the previous ARDEX, Asian Regional Disaster Exercise, we include all the stakeholders, including the government, local government, and then the community surrounding the industries, as well as the academia. So we call it pentahelix. So we endorse and we encourage the collaboration, the pentahelix collaboration. It means the 5 stakeholders involved through the webinars, and then through the tabletop exercise regularly within the level national or the level of the companies, and then also to involve the community surroundings during the drills. And also, I think this webinar is part of our role to disseminate the importance of understanding different types of hazards.
Yeah, I think that kind of drill in collaboration with the government and communities are very, very important, I think. Okay, so
Right.
perhaps this may be the last question for you, but I think it's very important and interesting. And security issues is one of the highest risk in industries. However, it is very rare to see that security incident report shared in the media compared to non-security incidents. So I'm really not sure whether this is true or not, but why do companies hesitate to share a security incident and investigating result if this is happening? What do you think?
Okay, thank you very much. I think because it is related to the reputation of the company. But we do have the collection of from the oil and gas incident, including the safety and security incident, and the result of the investigation under the Ministry of Energy and Resources, especially for oil and gas sectors. And now we are also helping the Ministry of Environmental to collect both the security incident related to chemicals and also related to safety incidents. So the particularly for the major hazard and also the industrial disaster. So they already have an application, mobile application, to report any chemical incidents, particularly for the emergency or crisis and the level of disaster, using the mobile application developed by environmental ministries. And then we could also, at the moment, having the community report, not only the industries, but to involve the community to report by using the mobile application. So hopefully by doing that, all the security incident and as well as safety incidents could be collected in a more appropriately. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And more the usage and the role of the SNS and such the tools can be very important and useful for information sharing. Okay, so thank you so much, Professor Fatma. It was really fortunate for us to have you, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience. And I look forward to continue our discussion the next session managed by your university. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, so now I'd like to invite the next speaker, Mr. Martin Krautmeyer, Senior Officer at the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent, IFRC. And he focuses on preparedness to emerging risks like nuclear or chemical hazards, as well as the global focal point for IFRC on civil protection relations. As part of the COVID operation, he is supporting Red Cross and Red Crescent societies in reviewing developing business continuity plans and adjust their contingency plans to the new challenging environment. And he's with the Red Cross movement since 2005, where he started his assignments as head of delegation with a mission in Timor-Leste in Indonesia, followed by in Sudan and in the Red Cross EU office in Brussels. So thank you, Martin, for participation and joining us today. So over to you. Unmute.
Unmute. Okay. Thank you and good morning to everybody. Just share my screen here, my presentation. Just let go. Yes. So thank you for the introduction. I am based in Geneva. The International Federation of Red Cross, Red Crescent Societies is the umbrella organization of the 192 national Red Cross and Red Crescent societies. So the presentation I will give to you will focus on nuclear and radiological hazards. However, also look at a humanitarian angle and the angle of community resilience and how we can strengthen, on the one hand, communities to get better prepared, but also our role as first responders and response organizations, how we fit into the preparedness framework and how we can get better prepared for the multi-hazard approach. My presentation will cover these 4 key areas. As already mentioned before, we'll talk about disaster risk knowledge. We talk about detection monitoring and possible consequences. We talk a little bit about the warning systems and communication, but also, and this is I think one of the key parts also for my work, is the preparedness and response capabilities and how we can enhance the preparedness in our multi-hazard approaches. First of all, why are we working on this topic of nuclear and radiological emergencies? It was very clear to us, and this is a testimony from a colleague who responded to the Fukushima accident, that there is quite a need in our preparedness because we identified quite a substantial gap. In March 2011, a lot of our colleagues in the Japanese Red Cross were responding to the earthquake and tsunami. We had around 10 emergency medical teams being deployed to Fukushima Prefecture. And as the accident happened in the nuclear power plant, people were quite worried and didn't really know what to do. They did not have a lot of knowledge around nuclear and radiological hazard, what that means to them, what that means to the communities. So the guidance which they had was that it's your decision, but we recommend to you, you need to leave for your personal safety and duty of care. They did not have any protective equipment, so they did not have any dosimeters. So that was quite a dilemma. And as a result of that experience in the Federation, we started this global program on strengthening national societies and communities to technological and biological hazards. So understanding the hazards, we need to go a little bit back to terminologies. I believe the definition of an emergency should be quite known by these participants of the webinar. It's a non-routine situation that necessitates prompt action to mitigate the hazard or adverse consequences for human life, health, property, and the environment. Looking now at the nuclear radiological emergency, there is an emergency or a perception of an emergency that the hazard due to energy resulting from nuclear chain reaction or from a decay of the products of a chain reaction, or an emergency due to radiation exposure. And we'll talk a little bit more. I'll give you some examples of these kind of emergencies. Oops, wrong direction. What is radiation? Radiation is actually quite common in our daily life. It's a form of energy in particles or electromagnetic waves. There are a lot of different types of radiation. Visible light is one form of it, so are radio waves. But the term which is interesting to us is ionizing radiation, which strips electrons from atoms in our bodies. And when atoms in living cells are ionized, one of 3 things happen. The cell dies, the cell repairs itself or mutates, or may become cancerous. So the key question in the approach of radiation protection is how good are our cells at repairing themselves after radiation exposure. And this is quite a big debate which is ongoing. On radiation risks, here is some definition which comes out of the International Atomic Energy Agency glossary, which has been published in 2018. So it's detrimental health effects of exposures to radiation and any other safety-related risks, which also includes the environment. Due to exposure of radiation, the presence of radioactive material, that includes also radioactive waste, or the loss of control of a nuclear reactor core, a nuclear chain reaction, radioactive source, or any other source of radiation. So that's just the definitions. Here, a bit more graphic. What are we talking about? Ionizing versus non-ionizing radiation. As you see, there are many applications of radiation, and the use, which is very much of interest when it comes to an emergency, looks at the upper end, be it cosmic rays, gamma rays, also X-rays, and there we do have consequences and impact on human health, and this is why we are more interested in the ionizing radiation. On the peaceful use of nuclear technology, a lot of people most of the time talk about nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is the largest application of nuclear technology. However, nuclear technology is used in a wide area, be it the medical part, where it's for inspection, you do X-rays, you do radiation therapy, you use it in diagnosis, in agriculture, you use it for radiation, mutation breeding, you change the structure of the crops to make them more resistant to certain effects of climate impact. Or in the industry, you use it for irradiation, you use it in the food processing industry, you use it to measure devices, especially industry when it comes to welding. You have very specific technologies there using radiation to ensure that the material is well welded and tested. Looking at the International Emergency Preparedness and Response System, to give you a little bit an idea of how the system is worked and constructed, there is a number of legal instruments which are at the core of those protective systems for nuclear and radiological preparedness. The International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the body based in Vienna, has set a number of guidance materials, which I'll present first, and they are collaborating with their member states in setting safety standards, tools, protocols, and procedures. In addition, it is the role of the states to set up then the national structures, including in their laws, and there is a network of international organizations that are involved in preparedness and disseminating some of the standards, or also developing the standards and have operational arrangements for response. If you look at the key conventions, there are two conventions which are the pillar of nuclear and radiological emergency preparedness, which is the Convention of Early Notification of a Nuclear Accident and the Convention of Assistance in case of nuclear accident or radiological emergencies. These conventions are established based on the IAEA mandate and implemented and signed, ratified by state parties and international organizations, and are applicable for nuclear or radiological emergencies regardless of its origin. The key document that defines the preparedness and response scenarios is the Global Safety Requirements, GSR Part 7. It has been reviewed just recently, and it describes in detail on what are the key protocols that need to be put in place, what are the key scenarios, and what are the measures that should be undertaken to be prepared and to have a proper response system in place. In addition, you have a number of safety standards which look at technical issues like the criteria for use of preparedness, the arrangements, and the termination of a nuclear and radiological emergency, which also has been published quite recently. Under these safety standards, there are these kind of operational arrangements which look in detail at SOPs, look in detail at arrangements, and also what the expertise is from different and the role of different organizations. If you look at the plan or the document which is in the middle, the Joint Radiation Emergency Management Plan of International Organization, this describes in detail what are the roles of the different participating organization, and when it comes to an emergency, this plan is put into action and the protocols are then used. There are also on a regular basis exercises and trainings to implement the plan, be it either on the operational side or on the communication side. But this is the network of the international organizations where the International Federation is part of. It is called the Interagency Committee of Radiological Nuclear Emergencies. And this network has a regular exchange either on a virtual basis or face-to-face basis, and exchanges each organization's activities in the area and the plans ahead, what could be done jointly to enhance that. This international coordination mechanism has been established after the Chernobyl accident in 1986 and has also found a quite revival after the Fukushima accident in 2011. On communication and warning systems, again, the International Agency, Atomic Energy Agency, has established a unified system for information exchange. This is an electronic system which has a counterpart in all the member states of the IAEA. And whenever there is an accident or an incident, the member state, through a dedicated contact point, informs the system. He sends a message in the USI system, and the USI system automatically transfers that information to all the other member states, and that keeps the information exchange up to date. And when there is a request for assistance, this also comes through this information exchange system, which is quite automated, and it's all based on the conventions of the IAEA. What is used for nuclear radiological emergencies is the INS scale. The INS scale has been developed by the International Atomic Energy Agency and the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency. And it's a tool which should help to communicate in which level of emergencies you are. In the INS scale, there is a differentiation between an incident and an accident. An incident is something which does not have a release of radiological hazard outside of their source, which has an impact to communities or human health. And on the accident, you see there are different scales from accident with local consequences to a major accident, which is INS scale number 7. This is a snapshot which has been developed by Reuters after the Fukushima accident. So the incidents and accidents you see here are those that go until 2012. You see Fukushima and Chernobyl are major accidents, but accidents and incidents happen on a regular scale. Also, since Fukushima, there have been a number of incidents and accidents, like a lost source which has been stolen in Mexico, or we had some cloud of radiological hazard over Europe that came from an unknown source, or we had a number of misuse of radiological testing equipment, which led to some overexposure of the people who were mishandling the equipment. One of the cases which has been mentioned before in the table is the Guyana accident in Brazil. And this is just to give you another example of an event and the consequences of this event. There was an abandoned cancer clinic, and junkyard workers found a radiation source. They opened it, they found in there a revealing blue powder. They didn't know what it is, there was no warning sign, and they took it home, thought this is a very interesting powder because it was glowing in the dark, and put it on their skins, and didn't really think about that there is any hazard. Only after a few days, when part of the family got sick, and the neighbors, one of the wives of one of the junkyard workers brought this source to the nearby hospital using a public transport, and the doctor was also not sure in the hospital what to do with it. So he put it there and asked a friend who he knew is an expert in radiation protection. And only after that one, when they started to measure of possible radiation, they figured out what it is. So as a consequence, there were 5 deaths, including a 6-year-old girl, 28 radiation burns. But what was much more a big consequence, in my opinion, was that it required monitoring of 112,000 people. And the picture shows the queue to the stadium, which they used for that one. 112,000 is about 10% of the population of Guyana. And you see that there must not be only a direct impact on human health, but there is the indirect impact as well on the perception of the risk and the worries of the population. Nevertheless, put it a little bit in perspective, nuclear radiological emergencies, if you compare that one on the consequence and frequency side, it definitely has huge consequences when it happens. The frequency, however, is rather limited due to all kinds of regulations and rules and this implementation of those. This is an example here from a risk assessment done by the Ontario province in Canada, but we can also see in a more general way, if you compare it to other technological hazards, this is a little bit the relation of nuclear radiological hazards. Nevertheless, as we are talking about multi-hazards, this is some map we have created looking at the earthquake zones and the location of nuclear power plants. And as you see, there are maybe some areas, especially in Asia, where you should think about these multi-hazard approaches and the consequences you have. There is a lot being done on the structural safety of nuclear power plants. Nevertheless, that should be also something you should consider when constructing and building these kind of plants. On the preparedness side, fiction or reality, a lot of you might remember this alert on Hawaii of a ballistic missile when there was a big discussion in North Korea around the use of nuclear weapons. And as a result, this false alert came out in Hawaii, And I just copied here also the reaction to some of my colleagues from the American Red Cross on Hawaii. There isn't much knowledge, and I think this is something which we're also aiming to improve. On what should be a key message, what you could do is get inside, stay tuned. This is the way also how we are currently communicating with short key messages on actionable things people can do and implement. Looking at another incident that happened only some months ago, which is again in Canada, in the province of Ontario, on a Sunday morning at 8:30 has issued an emergency alert that something was happening at the nuclear power plant in Pickering. Pickering is very close to Toronto. So you have a quite big number of population that could be impacted. And on that side, there was a lot of things that happened until the, oops, excuse me. There was a lot of things that had happened in the emergency preparedness zone once the alert came out. Be it the hospitals that started their processes that something could happen, or be it the emergency services on starting to get alerted and putting things in place in case there is a real emergency. Again, one of the key messages there, which we also use for general action when it comes to nuclear radiological hazards, it's time, distance, and shielding. This, I think, is one of the messages communities should be aware of, that when you have a hazard in a nuclear or radiological part, it depends on the time you are faced with the hazard, the distance you are from the source, and the shielding you have around you. So we recommend you to spend less time if you are in a great distance, or if you are in a building which is well protected, the risk are rather reduced. We do have a number of preparedness messages which we are opening. We have developed for a variation of hazards, key messages for disaster risk reductions. And one of the chapters there is key messages on technological hazards, which look at chemical, biological, and nuclear hazards. And this is used by our colleagues in community preparedness. And to close, on the scope of intervention for nuclear radiological emergency, we do have in all the phases of preparedness, response, and recovery, just to give you a little bit of the wide range of sectors which are impacted. It's on the one hand the communication, the general information for the public, also to develop the plans, linking it with the national local authorities, establish the trust and partnerships, but also look at the health impact and provide information of possible health impact and preparedness issues. And as mentioned also before, business continuation is something which also needs to be considered and thought through. If you look at the response part, there is a lot to be done on the immediate needs, on food, water, shelter, or livelihoods, looking also for nuclear radiological hazards on potential contamination and what to do. Or if you look at the health, if something has happened in addition, like the earthquake or tsunami, you might have also other specific medical needs, burns, or other injuries. And for us, very important, and the lesson learned from Fukushima and other emergencies is the protection of staff and volunteers, provide them with a proper PPE, personal protective equipment, and the appropriate training. And in the recovery phase, and this is something which we have noted after Chernobyl, but also now after Fukushima, there is definitely a need for specific psychosocial support to nuclear crisis, but also social needs of people who are relocated, establish education, resettlement, livelihoods. There is an ongoing health treatment of special vulnerable population. and we try to implement lessons learned from Chernobyl and Fukushima. These are some of our tools for awareness and communication on the multi-hazard approach. And for that, I thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, Martin, for your very informative presentation. And we also have quite a lot of questions for you. So first of all, you also mentioned about multi-hazard, and that is some sort of a very challenging issue for us since we are having the COVID-19 and natural hazards together. So one of the question is that now under the situation of COVID-19, if there is an earthquake and we have to be very careful about this nuclear hazards as well. So how we can prioritize these hazard risks based on the different aspects?
I have to say the current COVID situation brought us quite a number of challenges. On the one hand, with the restrictions, which kind of was a little bit of impacting also our system. So what we looked at was strengthen the local response and the local preparedness. So on that angle, we looked at how our national societies are placed, what is their mandate and their role, and how can we support them without sending now people, as this was a bit of an issue in the last months, to be better prepared. On the multi-hazard part, we are doing a regular risk assessment, which we review as part of our contingency planning processes, and the taking into account the new situations where you have restriction of movement, where you might not have access to warehouses, which we were facing in a number of regions. We had to find also different ways of operating, and emergencies happen. This is something which we know, especially in Asia Pacific. We did a plan of looking back of what are the emergencies that happened in the last 10 years. Then you look at the seasonal emergencies that come up, be it the monsoon, be it floods, be it heat waves. So based on that one, we were looking of where we can pre-position some of the equipment, and also make sure that we have arrangements with the authorities when there is a response needed, and also discuss with the communities what they can do. We do also have a specific fund, which is an emergency fund, and a new protocol, which is forecast-based action protocols, where we also try to release at least financial resources to the national society to get better prepared before the emergencies happen. So these are a little bit some of the instruments which we are trying to promote at the moment.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. So in that case, what would be the major role of IFRC to what in I'm sure you're working with the National Red Cross, but major role of IFRC?
The major role of IFRC is definitely the coordination role and the support to the national societies, but also on the communication side. We do have this network of volunteers, and we have the network of emergency units. And if we cannot deploy them in person, at least we try to support on a virtual basis through the network with the experts. So if there is some specific situation and somebody needs a very technical support, in previous years we have been flying there within 48 hours. Now we are sitting on the computer and try to provide people with support. We also have joint logistics and warehousing, where we are trying to release equipment, as I mentioned before. So this is quite vital to have these global procurement processes in place, because especially in the situations of the corona crisis, we had to make sure to have in place proper PPE for staff and volunteers, and also that they are having proper procedures, be it now business continuity plans or revised contingency plans in place. And this is our role here to bring that to our colleagues in the national societies.
Okay, thank you so much. So this will be the last question for you very quickly. You showed us a map in your presentation, and looking at your map of earthquake and nuclear risks, which shows that Southeast Asia has significant risks, and all Southeast Asian countries could potentially be impacted as well. And bearing in mind that this is a transboundary risk, are there any collaboration, like platforms to manage this major hazard for the Southeast Asia region?
It's a very interesting question coming from Asia to Europe, which I actually should give back to you, to Asia. No, on the nuclear side, nuclear radiological emergencies, I mean, yes, there are these assessments of what impact earthquake have on, for example, the nuclear power plants, and on the structural side, there was a number of enhancements to increase the safety of nuclear power plants. And on the organizational side, there was also a lot of trainings to enhance safety and security to respond to these kind of events. On the collaboration side, as said, there is this network through the International Atomic Energy Agency. They have as their members the different countries, and these countries meet on a regular basis. In the last months on the virtual basis, but they exchange their expertise. They have a nuclear regulator network in Asia. They have a network of response organizations that collaborate on their trainings and response mechanisms on a regular basis. And they come on a regional basis and on a global basis. So it's based on countries' interest to also look at that one. And there are a number of countries who voluntarily said, okay, if there is an emergency, we will provide our resources for support of the country affected. And that network exists. That network is training and exchanging on a regular basis. It is in different forms between Asia, Europe, and the Americas, but you have strong capacities in Asia, you have strong capacities in Europe and in Americas. And in these days, it's actually quite easy also to connect if you're not in the region cross-border.
Okay, all right, okay. So thank you so much, Martin, for your great and very informative presentation. And APRU is very lucky to have IFRC as a partner. So I hope we can continue working together. And I'm really looking forward to learning your experience and your knowledge in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I'd like to invite third speaker, Mr. Jeff Walker, Principal Advisor of JQG Consulting, which is a security, emergency management, and counterterrorism training and consulting company based in Sydney, Australia. And he served in the Royal Australian Navy more than 13 years. And he completed the then nuclear, biological, chemical defense course. And after leaving the defense force, he served in an Australian Federal Police for 7 years and served in the bomb response unit during this time. And he was also trained in chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear defense during this time. And Jeff has provided counter-terrorism and emergency management consulting and training to clients in Australia, Middle East, and the Asia-Pacific region for over a decade. So thank you, Jeff, for your joining us today. So over to you. Thank you.
All good?
Jeff, you can start the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, the screen come up? The my PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see your slides.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeff Walker. So I'm from Sydney, and I will give you a different perspective of the two, rather from the two very distinguished presenters that we had previously. So my approach is totally different. So I come from a tactical and military and police view. And as I said, understanding the topic today is understanding and addressing different types of hazards and risk. And predominantly we're talking about CBRN, which is chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. Using COVID-19 as a guide, COVID-19 has showed us the flaws in the response procedures that our respective countries have shown in the unknown, also the known as well. And it's so all we have to do is basically we just learn from it. And going back to CBRN and NBCD, it was used in warfare all those years ago in World War I to the present time. And whenever you talk to any person about CBRN, the first thing they'll go to, it's terrorism, it's chemical warfare, biological warfare. It is correct. And because my first experience in CBRN was in '86, actually, in the Navy, when I did my chemical and biological warfare course. And the words that I would never forget when we were fully suited up was gas, gas, gas. So we had a certain number of time to put your mask on, put your suit on, and then if you don't put it on time, unfortunately, they'll say that you probably die. So it's a good incentive. Excuse me. That's the same words that were used in the trenches in World War I. So, so today we're talking about the Australian Inter-Service Incident Management System, AIMS. We use it in this country to basically manage different types of incidents, ranging all the way from bushfires to floods and just major accidents. And what it does, it's basically combines everyone into one holistic organization. And now they're actually using it to for CBRN as well. What they use with the CBRN, they're actually involving the experts, which is normally the military and the police, and experts from overseas as well. It is a nationally recognized system. It is based on an American system of incident management. It utilizes the old agencies approach. And the best thing about it, it defines the functions of everyone involved. So if you have the police, the emergency services, the military, everyone has got a certain function within the organization. So there's no one crossing over someone else's territory. There's no turf war. So everyone is basically told this is your position, this is your responsibility, and this is how you will function. Excuse me. And the great thing about it, the terminology that they use, it is across the board. So it's they don't use police terminology, military, civilian terminology. All the terminologies are emergency management terminologies. So if one person communicates something across the board anywhere around the country, it's the same meaning. It doesn't change. There's no misinterpretation, which is really, really good coming from a military and a police background, because when you say something in a big multi-agency operation, you need your exact information to be captured by someone else across on the other side of the country. And it's a very adaptable, scalable approach, which means it could be used for a minor incident within a local community. For example, a building fire, which will affect quite a few buildings and fire engine units and police as well, up to a major crisis. For example, an aircraft crashing in a major CBD area where you get all the multi-agencies responding, and now it will be expanded as well very largely to a statewide or national agency where if it's a CBRN incident, it'll be a national jurisdiction. The Commonwealth will take control, which means the Prime Minister will take control of the overall operations, and also it's very flexible, very dynamic. So it'll fluctuate, it'll expand, and it'll basically go smaller if the incident dictates it. So it's a very robust and dynamic system. That's clear. It's incident management structure. You've got a structure which starts from the top, filters all the way down, a really good flow chart, and that everyone knows exactly what everyone does. Everyone knows who is in charge of which area, which sector. Communication lines are open, because this is what you really need for major incidents such as a CBRN incident. And saying that, CBRN incidents are also risk-based as well. So when I go to the next slide, we'll talk about the model and how risk assessment plays a major part as well. Effective resource management system where all the resources are allocated in a pool, and if you need it, it's there. If you need something else which isn't there, they've got a system and procedure where we procure it somewhere else. And a good example is the bushfire season, where multi-agency agencies work together, and we've actually got resources from overseas. You know, those big tankers, that water tankers that is it Elvis and something else, where we just sort of flies up into the bushfire areas and drop the water and refuel as well. So we use that from overseas. It's been leased when the bushfire seasons are on, and we also procure our own equipment to supplement these tankers as well, because it's a seasonal season. So we get the bushfires in summer, and the AIM system is brought to life, and then we just everyone has got the role to play as well. And risk management approach, as we'll go into it in the next slide. Communications in any situation, emergency management, disaster management, crisis management, communications is the biggest challenge. You've got to have a really robust system. It's got to be durable, and everyone's got to be defined. And what it does is there's always plan B as well. And you find that lots of people that man these the AIM systems are ex-military, ex-police, and ex-fire brigade. So they bring with them the experience of having a command and control background into this facet. And comprehensive planning processes with so you know, preparation is everything, and they'll just prepare and train for the event. And COVID has shown us a lot of lessons about not being prepared for any incident. And also the biggest thing is controlling the media, and where the media actually reports factual events as well. And review and modifications, it gets reviewed, it's updated, because the system cannot be static. It has to go in a dynamic situation with whatever the situation is. For a CBRN situation, if it's probably in this country, a CBRN won't be any accidental release. It would unfortunately, in an unlikely manner, be an act of terrorism. And if it's that, and everything gets reviewed, and the aims will basically used to combat that act of terrorism, to mitigate it, and the response procedures. It's to minimise the risk to people and property as well. I do apologise for my coughs, and dynamic, as I said, dynamic systems are. It is being next military. You've got to go with the flow. You can't go against the flow. And for all incidents, every incident's different. As I said, chemical, biological. A biological incident, an example is anthrax in envelopes, where you send it to an embassy, and it's different response procedures. You can have the police involved because it is a crime, and you can have the fire brigade hazmat team for the decontamination and the washdowns as well. And then you might, if it escalates, you got to bring the army chemical and biological and engineering team as well to come in. So basically it starts small, and it'll be expand to whatever the incident plays. That's the diagram that you see for disaster management process. So mitigation and preparation are the most important parts. You've always got to mitigate after the risk have been identified, and preparation. Training is included in preparation. So we do desktop exercises, scenario training. Now probably do online training. It is train until the impact point, until something happens. And then you'll just use all the training and respond accordingly. And with my personal experience, probably about 80% of procedures in your training are used, and then 20% you actually got to modify and be really dynamic and look outside the square. So that's what we always encourage people to think outside the square, use your imagination to solve problems as well. And after the response and the recovery phase, and then the circle goes around again. And on the other map on the other diagram on your right is the risk management model that we use. It's based on the ISO 31000. It's simple. It's established the context. The context probably a CBRN. We'll go down to a chemical release for terrorism, and identify the risks. So we'll look at the intelligence, what the risks are, and what the risk, if it's a release in the CBD in a confined area or in a populated area. And just using it as an example, we'll analyze it. We'll use it with our intelligence services. We'll look at the wind with the weather conditions and stuff, and what's being released, and then we evaluate the risk. And it's got to be the likelihood should, in today's day and age as well, even though we've got a terrorism rating of probable, likelihood is still low, but the consequence is very high, because the consequence of a release of any substance within a area, even a shopping center, is very high as well. And then we treat them. We treat the risk. So we mitigate the risk and treat it. So basically, awareness, intelligence, police, and monitoring all the chat lines. And also looking at overseas connection with in Asia and Europe, and the intelligence exchange between the police force and the intelligence agencies. And it's a continuous monitoring and reviewing process, and communication and consulting. So once you establish the risks, you always got to monitor it periodically. So and depends how frequent you monitor it. Depends on how large the threat, or how credible the threat is, and you communicate and consult. So the consulting phase will always be continuous. Yep. So the events, CBRN events, are unique and demanding. As we know, this world with the COVID proved it. It is demanding. It is very, very unique. They include the elements surprise, unseen agents, and risk of repetition. And as I said, using COVID, it's a great example. Took all of us by surprise. And you look at the unseen, the unknown, and even though we're trying to control it, just the repetitious circle keep going and going. And these factors may create intense reaction with the public as well. So once you identified the risk, you've got to look at the human factor, and how do you communicate to the public, and what do you do? What words do you use? What medium do you use? And because of lack of risk perception, such as being unfamiliar with it, because even though we had the SARS ages ago, we still haven't got a robust system. Few countries did. I believe Singapore had a really robust system based on the SARS, and the inability of some governments to act. So not all, and some governments just decide to stay back and say, oh, it's nothing, and lack of understanding. And the worst one's media saturation. Yeah, the media's got it's done really well here. The stories are they just every day it's about COVID, 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 and you know it's they should be more control and how more accountable to things that they say as well. And the challenges because you do need to after you've identified the risk and you do need to communicate and address the challenges for CBRN threats. It's unpredictable and sorry because the capability after you identify the hazard and the threat is it's a responsive procedure. You'll try everything you can to mitigate and to control and hold the risk, but it is mainly a response procedure. As in going back to the disaster management wheel and lack of experts. At the moment, with the media, everyone seems to be an expert, which is it's my personal opinion, and it is very disheartening where you don't get credible people actually speaking and telling the truth. That should be part of the risk assessment as well, and a CBRN threat, and different reactions and behaviours. If you look at this country as an example, some states actually are locked down totally, like Victoria, and some states are open. So it depends on how the government basically controls it. Lack of understanding of risk. Good example, wearing mask. Some experts say yes, some experts say no. Lack of control measures. Unlikely to happen. There's a likelihood, besides COVID, it's very, as I stated previously, very, very low. But there is always a chance of a CBRN release. Either the highest likelihood is by an act of terrorism. So if it's an accidental release, like for example, a chemical explosion in Beirut, it's still there. But in this country, we haven't got that storage at the moment. So, and providing accurate information where the information dissected is accurate and true, and that's why the media has got a responsibility to provide everyone with a true indication of what's happening. And biggest one's trust. That's a human factor as well. And if you ask different people, you talk, and the trust of the government and the controlling agencies varies. And some go, well, you know, some were stating about different things about 1984, George Orwell's, and some totally trusted governments as well. Yeah, threat perception. So preparedness. So we've always got to be prepared for things now, and it's confidence in the government to respond. So that's part of your disaster recovery wheel, and we need to have the confidence in the agencies to respond accordingly, and also looking at the personal preparedness as well. A good example for a CBRN incident was the Cold War, when the Russia and the US, where actually they were threatening each other with nuclear missiles, and the personal preparedness where the people in the States were building bunkers and stuff like that. So in the 60s and 50s, bunker sales went up the roof, and now the wheels come back again. So it started to sell very well as well. And I said also same as media and the response that you get from the people. So in basically summarizing, as I said, the AIM system that we use is, yes, it is very adaptable, and it's just unique because one size cannot fit all, and you do need to have a robust system, and it is based on the American system, where your pre-impact, your emergency restoration, and your capacity building. So the most important part's capacity building and pre-impact, where you build a really, really robust system, and and to minimize the impact of whatever CBRN emergencies that you have. And you've always it's got to be risk-based. We cannot cover every single risk and every single hazard. So it's got to be specified each country, each area. You've got to address what the risk is. And then you've got to basically mitigate the risk and put control factors into it. 25 seconds. and that should be it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff, for your wonderful presentation. And it is also very valuable for us to have someone like you who knows the practical aspects and the training the people for tackling these issues on the ground. So we have also a couple of questions for you, and specifically for the health community. And
Yes.
to prepare for the CBRNE and especially current COVID situation, they might be hit by natural hazards as well. And for them, the health community, what would be the most important aspects for to prepare for the next hazards?
Probably we got to identify what the hazards are in the CBRN sense, and then prepare the hospitals for and train the hospitals, the personnel. An example would be the Bali bombing years ago, where we had to fly the victims from Bali, and the only health facility that dealt with burns and that from bomb blasts is in Adelaide, I believe. So it's very rare. So now we've got to basically every state should have a hospital where you just prepare and you have special rooms, training, and decontamination. It's a one size fits all. And if if you use it, that's great. If you don't, you can use it for something else, for an ICU. But preparation and training and identification of the risk and the threats from CBRN should be a first priority as well, because it comes under security and terrorism. So it's talking to each other, as well as the normal natural disasters.
Right. So a risk assessment is definitely the very key issue to prepare for the multiple hazards.
And a big one as well is budget as well. So that controls everything in Western society. So we're looking at what budget's allocated to the health sector for hospitals and stuff.
Yeah, that's true. That's very, very important point. That's true. Okay, so the next question is that what are the potential challenges of developing countries in responding or mitigating, especially the chemical or biological hazards, and given that national agencies of some developing countries are currently doing a balancing act between prioritizing public health measures versus national defense measures?
That's where I suppose countries, first world countries, have got to establish a really, really good relationship with developing nations. And also, it's realistically, it's hard because sometimes some governments are corrupt, and then if you start giving funds and money for training, and the funds get siphoned to somewhere else, and just got to get foot on the ground and establish a good relationship, and just basically like the UN does, and you get established and you start implementing programs and procedures and training to their staff members in these countries. So the biggest one is establishing trust. So I always like to go back to the human factor. It's good we talk about money and all this stuff, but they just got about the common human factor where you got to establish trust with the countries and the people and who make decisions in the countries before you actually step into there to give them a hand.
Yep. Okay. Yeah.
Because everyone's well-meaning to help people, but if once trust is established, it opens doors and makes it easy as well.
Yeah, true. And also in your slides of communication challenges for CBRN threats, and you also mentioned lack of experts. So can you elaborate this lack of experts in which in
just using the COVID-19 and suddenly everyone's an expert on telly and telling them what to do, what not to do, and then they get disproved by someone else. And then the real experts, the infectious disease, who's got experience in biological warfare, and they're not asked for their comments because they're not part of the system. So, and an example where you get someone in charge who's got no medical background making decisions medically. So.
Okay.
Which is that's a challenge.
So when you talk about CBRNE, of course, it's very complicated, and because it's mixed, the different types of hazards. So when you categorize and work for CBRNE, and in which areas or fields you see the common areas as in the different types of hazards?
Just probably the the biological and chemical as well. They sort of the nuclear. It's only limited to certain countries with nuclear reactors and excess nuclear material. So chemical and biological, they sort of tend to go together because they're very cheap. They're easy to get to, easy to acquire. So that's the big control, and also I suppose they're going to be managed accordingly. And so for biological threat, just put some anthrax in an envelope and you send it to a credible place. That stops the whole business because you've got to be checked and it's got to be tested and stuff like that. So yeah, chemical and biological do work hand in hand for when we do the threat assessments.
Okay, I see. Okay, so at the beginning, as I mentioned, maybe some common areas like rescue information can be the shared in different types of hazard. So in addition to the risk communication, do you see any common areas we can tackle as a whole, from as a group together CBRN from the CBRN side?
I suppose they've got to have we've got to work with the same model as a foundation, and then we build it. As I said, the disaster management process, so everyone should be on the same page, and then we use the same the risk assessment process as well with ISO 31000. So everyone works in the same model on the same page, and all the information that we share we'll use the same terminology, will be the same and similar, so there's no misinterpretation and miscommunication.
Okay, all right. Okay, so thank you so much, Jeff. And it was very, very good for us to learn from a practitioner like yourself. So I hope we can continue working together in the future. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So lastly but not least, I'd like to invite Mr. Andrew Raj, Chairperson of the CBRN NATIC Asian Disaster Rescue Initiative, for a recap of the discussion today. And he's also the Southeast Asian Regional Director of the International Association for Counterterrorism and Security Professionals Center for Security Studies based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, as well as the Director of the Nordic Counterterrorism Network, a specialist think tank training center based in Finland. And he has been also serving as a lecturer and a visiting and senior fellow for the School of Strategic and Global Studies at the University of Indonesia, the Observatory on Security and CBRN Defense in Italy, and the Maritime Security Center of Excellence in Turkey. So thank you for accepting the task of the recap, which is very challenging. So over to you, Andrew.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Dr. Izumi from the APRU Programs of Disaster and Hazards, as well as the APRU team based in Hong Kong, Tina, and I think it's Christina, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you so much for having me here to recap this. I'll open up with a short remark, and then the key explanations of the speakers, as well as a take-home. Thank you so much to the speakers who have provided us with this first webinar series of the APRU series and with CADRI itself. 35 years ago, I remember being a cadet officer and saw my platoon mates great prepared for the first technological warfare in the 1990 Gulf War. And 35 years forward, I still see the same predicaments happening on the threats pertaining to CBRNE. In 2008, I was a visiting fellow at the Japan Institute for International Affairs, where I presented on biological threats at a UN event. And that takeaway from that event kind of wanted me to bring this up today in our presentations from our speakers. And the key point here, what I wanted to actually explain is that ensuring human security is one of the priority areas for sustainable urbanization process. Now, the rapid changes in urban landscape and the ever-increasing expansion bring about unexpected risks to urban communities. Now, most of the time, these are carried out without adequate knowledge on the associated risks to these factors. Now, often these risks associated to these infrastructures developments are unknown, as they have not been used sufficiently long to be exposed to extreme hazards globally. So one way of overcoming the difficulty is to model the risk by stimulating the physical phenomena and their impacts on people and property in the affected areas. However, currently available methodologies such as assessment do not adequately consider how the dynamic behavioral patterns of people at risk should be addressed. At the end of this recap here, the priority is the community. How well are we going to protect the people? Government organizations have always set up policies, engaged in know-how trainings and stuff, but that dissemination has never been flowed through down to the communities at the bottom. And in Southeast Asia, as you and one would know, you would not expect the general person down the line to understand what the CBRN threats are. Now, the first APRU the workshop that was held in February in Sendai, we addressed the preparedness of these communities, especially to university campuses. And we've seen what sort of threats that happened in Hong Kong in the last riots that actually affected a university with chemical devices stolen from the university campuses. So preparing the community is our utmost importance here. And we should look into that more now than the policies, because the policies are already there. It's set up, it's there, but how well it has been propagated to actually influence and how to make people prepared downline, we still don't have that answer. You know, you have seen the COVID-19 and how people are in preparedness. We would think that the pathogen, which is actually a biological threat, would have been much more dealt with professionally and in preparedness. We saw it in Europe that took a long time for the preparedness of COVID-19, as well as in Southeast Asia. So we have the policies, the recommendations, the SOPs all set up, but it's not trickled down to the communities how to go about this. Communities are not interested in policies and how the government works. They're interested in living their lives and addressing these threats and how to protect their livelihoods. So what CADRI intends to do here is to provide that basic knowledge, awareness, training programs to communities that do not have these understandings, and how we should trickle down this awareness programs and training. Now, the three speakers engaged in topics that I picked up on lessons learned from Dr. Fatma, as well as from Jeff, talked on the communications of challenges on CBRN, and Martin from Austria. Sorry, is it Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken? Sorry if I got that wrong. And what we need to do in an event. Now we take a look at all the three speakers, and I've narrowed down to the point that practically people don't really know what to do. Now, so how are we going to engage this? Now, the take home here is that how do we bridge the gap between research and policy? Now, research has been ongoing, and how does that influence the policymakers in trickling down the SOPs on CBRN? Now, this can take a long time, as what Martin said. It all depends on the states to initiate what they think is the right procedure. Now, do we need to wait for states to engage in this to trickle down to the public awareness programs? I don't think so, because for 35 years, the first technological warfare in the 1990 Gulf War didn't seem to actually engage the public in how to actually go about preparing on CBRN threats, be it a criminal threat, be intentionally or be it unintentionally, I'm sorry, accidentally for that matter. So we are seeing this transpire now, and the issues here that they are actually mutating. Just like COVID-19, CBRNE is mutating to different, what you call is pathogens. So we need to actually educate the people down there. How do we do this? How does research bridge the gap between policy and influence them? And this is what researchers need to take a look into: gathering research, providing it to the policymakers, having the policymakers adhere to what the researchers have actually looked into. Now, Jeff mentioned something about experts. You can't have a medical doctor talk about a certain issue when he is in line with his duty. So there needs to be a pool of different experts, academics, practitioners, professionals, people trained in all sectors to communicate together to address these kinds of threats. Now, we've seen the major COVID-19 on how different governments were not prepared. Many people giving their own views. And these came from, and these information actually came from well-known organizations. And everybody is back-mouthing here who's right and who's wrong. But right now, our focus here is to trickle down this awareness and training program towards the civilians, the public community, which is our priority. At the end of the day, civilian lives are more important than what governments are trying to provide. So I hope that this presentations and what KEDRI intends to do in the near future with the APRU multi-hazards program is to bring this awareness and knowledge towards the public community in preparing them. Now, Japan has seen a wide transformation from what has transpired over the years to the tsunami that recently, that in the last couple of years that took place, and how prepared they were, and what failures they learned from it. And I had the opportunity to meet many of these people from the Fukushima area during our visit in February. And you would be amazed on how people were not prepared for CBRNE as much as they were prepared for natural disasters. So we need to actually trickle down this awareness program, like I said, to everyone. And to provide this awareness, it doesn't have to be a government organization or a government stakeholder or an organization to handle the threat. Civilians should be able to also be prepared to address their communities within. And this is what I think the Asian region needs to also propagate in educating the masses based on awareness programs and trainings. So to wrap up the whole thing, we do hope that this takeaways and presentations from the research point of view and to the policy making decisions for governments can be bridged better, and the understanding of the private sector and the public sector can come together in addressing these new threats that we foresee in the near future. And I don't think this is going to end with the COVID-19. Diseases, pathogens have been on the planet Earth. It is just something that will just pop out in a new time frame. So with this, I'll close up my remarks and thank the APRU multi-hazards department for providing and giving a platform for people to actually look into this more seriously. With that, I'd like to thank Dr. Izumi for hosting this, and thank you so much for attending this presentations.
Thank you so much, Andy, for your wrap up and summarize the discussion. I'm sure it was really challenging task, and again, thank you so much for pointing out very important points and how to increase the knowledge and also the awareness among communities on CBRNE. Because and for us, even to increase the community awareness about natural hazards, it took quite a long time. So now we have a much more difficult task, how we can convey and communicate these risks, future risks with communities and share the knowledge. But I'm sure we have now quite a good partners right now from IFRC and Red Cross and Red Crescent Society, national societies, and universities and the private sector. So with that, I hope we can continue our discussion and work in the future. And also that for us, especially for academia, it's very important role to fill in the gap between the research and policy. So for that direction, I hope we can work together to fill in the gap. So that is all for today's session. I'd like to express sincere appreciation to all the speakers today and also the audience. And also thank you for sending us many questions. And I have to apologize, we were not able to answer to all the questions given by the audience. So as I mentioned in my slides, this webinar series comprises 3 separate sessions. So we have 2 more on the 14th and 28th of October. And second session on the 14th will be operated by University of Indonesia from Jakarta. So Professor Fatma is contributing to managing and planning to this second webinar. So I really look forward to that. And the theme of the second session is strengthening disaster management strategies through multi-stakeholder partnership. We will have speakers from UNDRR and UNICRI too. So please check the details on the APRU website, and the registration link will open soon. And please be informed that the recording and the slides of this session will be shared by email and also on the APRU website. And once again, thank you very much for your the participation and also sharing your knowledge and experiences. I hope to see you at the next session on the 14th of October. Then, and also at the last session on the 20th of October. And once again, thank you so much for joining us, for both speakers and audience. Thank you.